Okay, good morning. If you still wanted to put something in chat, about what you're finding hard to accept, or as we're talking today, if you have a comment that you want to put in chat, please go ahead and do so. And then also, if you wanted to comment or anything, you can use the raise your hand feature to do that. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm really glad to see all of you today. As I said in my email, this is actually a topic that I'm super excited to talk about. It's something that, even before the pandemic started, there was some things that happened, with my family and my personal life that it was really difficult in the beginning of the year. And so this idea of acceptance, when you can't change what it is. So it's, what we're talking about today is when you can't fix the problem. Like we can't fix the pandemic. We can do our part to like not spread it and that sort of thing, but we can't fix it. We have to deal with it. And so how do you learn to accept what's happening in reality? And it was funny yesterday, Ms. Gunter and I were talking and we were like, did we purposely plan to have this topic on the week of the election, or was that a happy accident? And I honestly don't know. I don't remember, but I don't think we planned it this way. But I think it's a very appropriate topic for right now, because when you have things like elections or stuff like that, and you see the way stuff happens, sometimes we have, definitely that's one of those things that you can't change the outcome, like that it is the outcome. And so that's something that you have to learn to accept, if you're not happy with the outcome. I do want to say, hopefully we're not going to delve into politics a lot today because I don't think that's going to be a useful use of our time. But I do want to talk about this idea of acceptance. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Gunter. Go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, what a week and what a month and what a year it's been. One of the things I wanted to start off with is there's so much stress and negativity that I would love for you to put in the chat, just something that you're grateful or joyful for. I think it's really important to start that way because we're going to talk about a lot of things that might bring up some stress, might bring up a little bit of anxiety. And so if you guys would just start throwing things in there as I start, of what you're grateful for, what's going well. And this was a very happy accident. I think when we started talking about acceptance, we were probably leaning towards, accepting, the pandemic and how things are going. I didn't even think it was election week. I didn't think that through. So here we are. I think it's perfect. So today we're going to talk about something called radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is part of a type of therapy called DBT, and that's dialectical behavioral therapy. And when you break down the words radical and dialectic, radical is meaning just like every part of us. So our mind, our body, our soul, and then acceptance, how we respond to the things that are happening around us. And when you think of the term dialectics, which is part of the therapy, it basically means the type of thinking that occurs when two things that are true can be happening at the same time, even if they're opposite. Like an example of that would be, I really love my partner because, he buys me presents and is very kind to me, but I hate that he is messy and doesn't take out the trash, right? Those two things can be happening at the same time. Neither of them are false. And when it comes to radical acceptance, it's, I'm in the midst of a pandemic and I'm okay. So it's those two opposing views that are actually reality, that can be our reality. So the concept of radical acceptance, it comes from that therapy. And this is a therapy that we use for students who have high emotional dysregulation. So students whose, emotions are just fluctuating a lot. They can be very intense. And the idea of is it to help you regulate your emotions and help you have some distress tolerance, because life is stressful. And you're going to have times where you're just feeling not okay. And how do you get through those times? So that's kind of where this therapy comes from. It actually is used typically for eating disorders, students who have borderline personality disorder, those kind of things. But we can use just parts of that therapy in our everyday lives. And that's what the radical acceptance is. So radical acceptance, it rests on letting go of the illusion that we have control of something. And there are many things in our life that we don't have control over, and we might even consciously acknowledge that we don't have control over them, yet we still try to control them, right? Like I always think about our students, right? If I bug my kid enough, he's going to get his homework done. May or may not affect what he decides to do, but I choose to do that anyways. More often than not, I'm left feeling disappointed because my efforts are not working. And then I leave myself feeling more frustrated, more disappointed because I've kind of come up with the idea that I have some sort of control over this. So radical acceptance rests on letting go of the illusion of control and a willingness to notice and accept things as they are right now without judging. And I like the term illusion because that is pretty much what it is when we talk about that we do have control. I go back to, students and how much control do we actually have over our children? We can control, how much internet they get. We can control their phones. We can't control the way that they think. We can't control the way that they perform in school. We can force them to sign on to school, but we can't force them to actually engage in the classroom, complete their assignments. And I think, this is just like a small everyday thing. And radical acceptance can be used, even for the more challenging struggles like, grief and loss or, the pandemic or all these other things that are impacting us. And so I really like to focus on what things do I actually have control of. The basic idea behind radical acceptance is to view the tough situations that we're experiencing or have experienced, and then acknowledge the emotions that they bring up. What emotions do they bring up in the present moment? And then learning how to accept those emotions. Like for me, this week has brought up a lot of uncertainty, kind of unrest and anxiety. And no matter how much I watch the news, it doesn't change, the direction that the election goes, right? It just kind of creates more anxiety the more I watch, but I can't stop watching. And I start to feel a little bit unsettled in my chest. My shoulders are tense. And so as I was preparing for this lesson, I just had this thought of like, okay, I cast my vote. I did what I had to do. I did my part, and whatever happens, happens. And I know that I will be okay. My kids will be okay. My clients will be okay. And it doesn't mean that I'm okay with it. It just means that I can personally be okay with how I feel throughout that process. So what I wanted you to do with that piece of paper is I wanted you to just take a couple of minutes to jot down some things that you're worried about. And it could be anything from your children to the state of the world. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to give us maybe 3 minutes to just write down some things that are creating some unrest within us. So you can just kind of keep that ongoing list because it's something that we're going to be using throughout. So maybe stuff will pop into your mind later, but just keep that list by your side. And I'll give you another minute to just start writing things down. And it could be something small. It could be something big. It could be, I'm feeling stressed that, my neighbor doesn't like me, or I'm feeling, upset that my kids aren't doing their work, or it could be, I'm feeling sad that I lost somebody that I love. It could be anything from smaller to maybe something more impactful.
So, Yvonne, can you say the question again? Because somebody was just asking in the chat.
Yes, I just wanted you to write down a list of things that are causing you stress or anxiety right now in your life. Anything from something minor to something really big that's impacting you. Ginny, you're so good at reading the chat and like doing stuff at the same time. I totally cannot. Thank you.
Many, many Zooms.
So just hang on to that list. As humans, we just don't like to feel uncomfortable. Our bodies are designed to like get us away from discomfort. You think about like putting your hand near a flame and you pull it back, and that's how we respond to emotions as well. And a lot of times it does more harm than good, because to get through something, sometimes we have to just full on go through those difficult emotions. So radical acceptance is a form of distress tolerance. It helps us to not make an already uncomfortable, painful situation worse. So it doesn't say that it takes away the pain, but it just helps us to not make decisions and have behaviors that make that feel worse. So I'm going to give you kind of an example of something that I really thought I had some control over, and it's kind of silly, but you might relate to this at the beginning of the pandemic. So when this all first started, I was like, I have to make this as normal for my kids as possible. So I'm going to make them sit down at the table every day. I put schedules on their doors. They have to do their homework between this time. We started a garden. I was having them send postcards to relatives they don't even know. We were calling all kinds of people. Like, it was just like a lot. And I think my hope was to make life feel normal. I was fighting what was happening. And the kids were like, what are you doing? Like, when's the last time we went on a family walk? Like, this is bizarro, right? And so I think I was fighting the reality so hard. And then seeing the kids not really play into what I was doing was creating even more stress. Then I was thinking, oh my gosh, they're not okay. This is not, working. I have to like really control the situation and protect them from everything that's going on in the world. And it was so much more abnormal than it had to be. And I was so stressed about it. I noticed that my mood was dipping. I was like hyper worried about the kids' mental health. Like, it just was so much more abnormal than it needed to be. So it's like there was the pain of the pandemic and how my life had been changing and all our lives had been changing, but it's the pain plus the denial of the situation that leads to suffering. And so suffering is something that we have more control over. The pain, like, that's a reality of our life, right? We're gonna, have a divorce. We're gonna lose people. We're gonna, have these things happen, something maybe with our children, or, things aren't gonna go according to plan. And that's painful. But what we do with that pain, determines how much we're gonna suffer through that situation. So with the pandemic, it's like once we finally settled into our normal, like, it was normal for me to come home from work, cook dinner, lay on the couch and watch TV with the kids. Like, that's what I normally did. So when I kind of found that normal again, and, of course we want them to do healthy things, and those weren't bad things that I was trying to do, but I was trying so hard to make it normal, and it wasn't normal. So it's that idea of like fighting our current reality. Tara Brach, she wrote a book about radical acceptance. And if you get a chance, you should definitely read it, because it talks about how to use this in every part of our life. And I know for me, like, I just struggle with wanting to fix things. Like, that's my job. My job is to try to help people fix their problems. And many, many times we don't have the power to do that. We don't have the ability to do that. And it just causes more distress. Let's see. So one of the things that she says, and this one's an interesting one, it says, accept it as if you chose it. And so I had to sit with that one for a little bit. Accept it as if you had chose it. So if I were to come up with the situation, okay, obviously I wouldn't choose a pandemic, but what does it look like when we choose something, right? If I choose to go do an activity, it's not very stressful. I feel at peace with that decision. I enjoy that activity. So those are things that would come with me actually choosing something. So how do you do that when it's a situation that you did not choose and you're not comfortable with? It's almost like a fake it till you make it. I don't know if you've heard the term opposite action. It's like, do the things that your instincts are telling you not to do. Does that make sense?
Yvonne, can I interject here a little bit? One thing with this whole concept of radical acceptance that really helped me when I started embracing this and thinking about this was that acceptance doesn't mean approval.
Mm-hmm.
And So, like, if you take the pandemic or anything that you might be struggling with right now, it doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean that you're okay with it. It just means that you're going to stop fighting it because
Mhm.
you can't change it.
Yep.
So that was something when I heard that approval doesn't mean acceptance, or acceptance doesn't mean approval. Sorry, I said it the wrong way. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It was like this little like light switch went off in my head, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
Mhm. Like it doesn't mean you love it. It doesn't mean you gave it your stamp of approval. It doesn't mean that it's something that you would want for yourself, but it is. It is what it is, right? And that, sorry, my dog's snorting. Um, no, I like that. So I want you guys to go to your list, and it might require some vulnerability if there's somebody that wanted to kind of work through one of these. But what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have you take your list and you're going to divide it up. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your list and you're going to decide in there, which of these things do I actually have some control over versus which of these things do I have no control over? And remember, some of these things you have some control over. So you can note that as well, of like, I have a little bit of control over that. But not a lot. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. And then I'm going to have a couple people share. Like we'll start with, which of the things you have control over, and then we'll talk about that. And then I'll have a couple people share which of the things do you not have control over. So just go through your list and figure out what you have control over and what you don't. So just remember, our brains like to complete problems. And so sometimes they kind of mush together all the things that we have control over versus all the things that we don't have control over. And we don't even know what we have control over. So we try to control everything. And so I would love if somebody would feel comfortable enough to just share one of what do I have control over right now? Like I'll start just to make it a little easier. I don't have control over the whole pandemic, but I do have control over, to a certain extent, protecting myself and my family. It's not foolproof, but I can do all the things that I can to keep myself safe. Don't know if it'll work, but I have some control over that.
So for me, Yvonne, I have, just my quest to improve my diet and eating healthy. I have control over what I put in my mouth. I do. Nobody is forcing me to eat candy. So I have control over that.
Yeah. Was it helpful that there was no trick or treating?
It actually was, because there was a lot less candy in my house. My daughter has recently got a job at See's Candy, so she occasionally will bring stuff home. That is not helpful, but that there was no trick-or-treating this year, that was a positive.
That is not fair. No pressure. Nobody wants to share. Totally okay. And you could even throw it in the chat as well. I know it's a little bit more comfortable sometimes. So just something that you've been stressed about that you do have control over. And I like that, Jenny, about like your health. Yeah. They talk about like, you're more vulnerable to COVID if you're not healthy. It's like, okay, I have some control over that.
can share too. So, kind of going off you, Miss Gunter, that you're saying about the whole pandemic. I don't have control over what other people think about the pandemic and how serious they can take it, but I do have control over how serious I can take the pandemic and my thoughts and feelings on it.
I love that because sometimes I don't realize the frustration that you have when you see other people that are not abiding by the rules that you think they should be abiding by and how much like stress that can add. No, I love that. Thanks. So we're talking about perceived control. Is there anything that anybody found where when you really thought about it, you learned, I don't actually have any control over that? I've been feeling a really conflicted, half excited, half terrified that my son wants to go away to college next year. And I don't actually have control over what he does. I'm actually really happy for him, but I do have control over, like how I talk about it with him. But at the end of the day, he's going to do whatever he wants to do. And that's part of his experience right now. And I'm doing my best to accept that. Having a tough time, but no control over it.
Yeah, with me too. Mine's kind of the opposite. My daughter's going the opposite way, where like in my whole life, like I just envisioned she's going to go to a 4-year college, and she's, because she's got good grades, she has the classes, and she just with her mental health and where she's at, she's like, no, I'm not going to. And so at this point, I don't even know if she's going to go to junior college. Where she's just not, that's her decision and like where she's like what she's deciding to do, and I don't have control over that. I can talk to her about it, I can give her advice, but in the end it's going to be her and her decision. And that's something that like I've been really struggling with, and like letting that go and being like I can't control this.
Another part of radical acceptance is the idea that you can think about the things that led up to this moment. Because a lot of times people will feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just like, blindsided by this. But the notion that everything that happens in the world leads up to this moment. So kind of that like it happens for a reason. Again, doesn't mean that I love it, but this is where we are right now. And I think, there's many things that led us to being here. And initially, I kind of had a hard time with this topic because I thought it felt very passive to me. Like, it just feels like, oh, what it is, what it is. And as the wind blows and, that kind of thing. But it really isn't. It actually takes more energy for me to let go than it does to continue to like control the things that I don't have control over. And so, why is it so important to accept our current reality? And it's, rejecting the reality, it doesn't change the reality, right? Changing reality actually requires first accepting it. So it's kind of like that first step in the process of changing. Pain is something that is totally unavoidable. It's nature's way of signaling that something is wrong. So something that is going to happen. And again, it's how do we respond to that? Rejecting reality turns into that suffering that we talked about. Refusing to accept things keeps you stuck. That denial that keeps you stuck in those unhappy feelings, and it prolongs how long it takes for you to move forward from something. Acceptance, the hard thing is that it's like you're accepting it, and that can actually lead to sadness. But it's that deep calmness that usually follows that. So it's like you have to get through that painful piece before you can accept and move forward. And sometimes the path out of something bad is straight through the misery. And so I think that's why it's important to accept those realities. There are so many things that we don't have control over. And, like for me, it was my kid's school. It's what's going to happen with the election today. I have no idea. And so what I've really tried to do is, when I make these lists of like what works and what doesn't, what do I actually have the control over? I'm learning every day that like I don't have control over a lot. And so, this is just something that I think is important for us to practice just in every day, so I know that for all of us, we obviously have kids in high school. And so I wanted to take one of these scenarios and just kind of work us through basically like a worksheet, if you will, like what you would do in a therapy session if you were having stress about a situation. And so if somebody wants to throw out an idea of a stressor, and it doesn't have to be your stressor, but just a stressor that we can all work through together and kind of go through this acceptance process together, I'll show you how to kind of walk through that thought and that process to get through it so that you can move forward. So I'm trying to think of something that we're kind of all in the same boat right now. So Ginny, I don't know if you want to help me out with that.
Well, why don't we, it has to be something like for ourselves, because I was thinking like, with our teenagers, like what if they helping them break it, when they break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to do it like our own personal or like.
No, it doesn't matter. I mean, just the idea of something that's really caused stress or anxiety in our lives, right? So if that caused stress or anxiety in our life.
Or the loss of a job, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of like what is something that we've all can kind of relate to in some ways. And it could be like a disappointment in our kiddo, or it could be, like you said, like a job loss. It could just be the pandemic. I mean, that's kind of the.
Well, why don't we do just distance learning? Because that's something that we're all dealing with.
That's a great idea. So the first question of this is, okay, we're going to go with distance learning. What did you have control over in this situation? Not a whole lot. So maybe just throwing some ideas out. Claudia says nothing.
I mean, I guess, and I'm thinking of you, Yvonne, and like I know that you like bought desks for your kids and like set up study areas in your house. So like that's something you can have control over. I mean, I know I'm kind of in an interesting position because I'm on both sides of it, right? I'm like the principal, and so I've got the messaging for the school, but then I also have my own home and my own kids doing distance learning. And so both sides. So there's some things that like there is some control. Like for me as principal, my messaging and communication about this is how distance learning is going to work, making sure that the teachers got out, at the beginning of the year, that first week of school, they got out the Zoom code so that people knew how to get online and like that stuff.
Yeah. And like as a parent, like, did you sign up for School Loop? That's something that we have control over. Are we aware of what's going on in all the classes with our kiddos? Do we need to be? Those are things that we can make choices for. What else did we have control over? Virginia says keeping her kids safe. I try my best to make sure my kids go to bed at a decent hour. It doesn't always happen, but I don't really have that much control over that either. I can make sure they go in the room and take away their devices, but that's as much as I can do. Hillary, getting 3 meals and healthy snacks ready. That has been the toughest part of this pandemic for me. In fact, before I walked in my little office here and closed the door, my son's like, "Are you gonna let me starve?" And I'm like, "Well, you're 12, so no." But that's hard. That's another job on top of what we're already doing. Totally took for granted the lunch program at school.
Yesterday, I think it was 2:30 in the afternoon, and my son was like, "Are you gonna give me lunch?" And I'm like, "Oh, right."
Okay. Virginia says, "Yep, end up having 3 times 3 meals." That's true. It's like I have kids to feed, and I have control over that. If I do that, which I usually don't.
All right, so we've got a hand up.
Yes.
I think maybe when we talk about control something, maybe we can change the question to be what we can do for that. Mm-hmm. I think maybe that would be easier. Mm-hmm. The other thing is when we're talking about acceptance and control, may I know what's the difference between that? Thanks.
What was that last part? It was, what's the difference between acceptance and control?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think acceptance is just being aware of the feelings that you're feeling in a certain situation, where control is like, what can I do directly to impact this situation? Which, like, when we're talking about distance learning, it's like nothing we do, whether we provide snacks or whether we give them the right bedtime or set them up with desks, it still doesn't necessarily change the trajectory of how they do in school, right? Like, it just doesn't. And, you know, we can do all these things. And I think that's why it's so important for us to differentiate, like, what we have control over versus what we don't. Like, I have to go into parenting with, like, not the intention that, okay, I'm going to do all these things, and the expectation is that they do perfectly well in school. That's not reality.
So I guess I'll add in, and maybe this is helpful. I think when you talk about distance learning is our reality. Like, that's something that we have to accept. We can't change that. And I certainly, none of you guys as parents, you guys are all great, but I've had parents be like, we can't do this. Like, well, this has to change. And I'm like, well, I don't control the state of California. I don't control the county of Santa Clara. This is our reality. Like, this is what we have to do. So we can't change that. That's something that we have to accept. And so when you talk about within the acceptance, like, what can you control? What are things that we can do? Like, this is our greater reality, like what we have to accept. You can control certain aspects of, like, how you deal with it and how do you respond to it. You know, do you create, you know, a place in your house so your kid has a place to do distance learning and be the most successful they can? Are you as a parent, you know, finding out, like, what do they have to do in their classes? What is the teacher asking of them? And so that you can better support your kids. Are you doing those 3 meals a day and, like, you're doing more grocery shopping, and so you've got the food in the house that you didn't normally have to have because you weren't feeding them 3 meals a day every day? So
Right. And with that first question of, like, what did you have control over? I like that it talks a lot about, like, not having control of other people. Like, the parents that are calling you upset like that, it's like, are still in denial that this is happening and not acknowledging that whatever is, you know, you have no control over this. They have no control over you. They have no control over the governor. They have no control over these things. And the sooner that you're able to accept that you can't control the behaviors of other people, I think the more you're going to find peace with the situation and figure out how to move forward. The second question, as we're going through this, okay, distance learning, is what was your response to the situation? How did you choose to respond to this distressing event? Sometimes it might feel like there's no choice over how to respond, but there really is a choice. So with distance learning, how did you respond? I think initially it was like, oh my God, I'm going to be home with my entire family every day, all day. Like, I was kind of nervous of how that was all going to play.
go ahead, you have your hand up.
I like to share that I just like to observe. For example, for my son, he's senior now. So I cannot control how he learned in his room for this pandemic time. But I can feel that I control something in the future, because when he leaves the home to the college, I know what he will look like. So for that part, I feel some control inside myself. Thank you.
I love that letting go of what he does actually empowers you to be able to feel confident about what he does later on in the future. Because a lot of times I've kind of been micromanaging my kids, and then I'm like, how is he going to do this on his own later on? Well, I haven't really given him the opportunity to even try that out. So I love that idea of just being able to let go and watching and observing and seeing, like, how is he going to fare when he leaves? That's great. I love it. Anyone else with, like, response to the current situation of distance learning? How did you initially respond?
I wouldn't mind sharing. So my daughter kind of struggles in school already, and she's an avid for extra help. Keep her organized, give her more organizational skills, things like that. And so she started out pretty good, being a freshman, excited for school. And then I think that whole COVID of this is our new reality kind of sank in. And I think she's kind of missing out on all that high school stuff that she was looking forward to. And so I could see a change in her, and her just being a little bit more depressed. And when she first started distance learning, she was getting out of her bed, doing it on with her desk. And then slowly I noticed that she would start to just leave the computer on the nightstand. And then now she's just taking class from in bed, staying in her jammies all day, not even getting up and getting dressed and brushing your teeth or preparing yourself for your day like you would if you actually physically had to go to school. And for me, it's really hard because I'm a mom that works and I work a lot of hours. And so for me not to be able to be home and constantly being able to check in with her, she'll call me throughout the day and FaceTime me. And I just have to do my best to just keep checking in on her grades, her mental health, like just trying to check all those boxes to make sure that she's doing what she needs to do. And then also making sure that I don't put too much pressure on her so that she doesn't crack, and that she's still positive about the whole experience and lack of experience. And something that we tried this week was for her Wednesday tutorial, she had set up with 2 teachers. I actually just brought her to work with me, and I put her in an empty conference room office. So she had her own office space, and she actually had to physically get up, get ready to come to work with me. She had to make a lunch like she would for school. And I totally noticed a difference in her yesterday. And so I think moving forward, where I'm going to try and bring her to work with me 1 to 2 days a week, just to give her, hey, you're going to get out of the house today. You're going to go do something. You need to get ready for it. And hopefully that helps make a difference. And that's something new that we tried this week.
I love that. Thank you. It's like that thinking outside of the box. Like, this is something we've never really experienced before, obviously. And it's like, okay, we're trying all these different things. And that's awesome, Kelly, that you realized this is something that's actually working for her.
Yeah, I think I like this, what Jill put in the comment. I went in waves. I had times where I was optimistic and making the best of the situation, and other times where I was feeling blue and not accepting the reality well. I don't know about you guys, and I think, those of us that work at the school, it is different. But I find that, like I'm some days I'm like, all right, let's do this. And like I'm peppy and energetic and we've got it. And then I have other days I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I cannot get on Zoom again. I can't, like, I'm so sick of this. Like, I'm just so tired of this. And I think that that's, especially when you have a situation like this that's ongoing and that there is no end date. And I think somebody earlier in the chat said that that's something that they struggle with accepting, that we don't know when normal is coming back, that makes this like even more difficult, because I think when you know where the end is, it makes it easier. Like this morning I got up and I was on my Peloton, and it was super hard this morning. I was just feeling really stiff and I was tired. And it was like, I was like, oh God. I'm like, but then in my head, I'm like, I've got 2 more minutes. I've got this. I got 2 more minutes. There's an end,
Can
And
you imagine if you got on your bike and you had no idea when the end was? It could
yeah,
be a 4
exactly.
ride, it could be a 5-hour ride. That would be horrible.
So I think that's like, but that's what we're living through right now. We don't know, is this a short ride or is this a super long? Like, we have no idea. And so you can't prepare for that. And I think that is just, for us as parents, and just not even just as parents in our own careers and everything, but then also like we have to like model for our kids, and our kids are going through this, how difficult this is, that we just, and I think that that's so normal to like, yeah, that we're going to have good days and we're going to have bad days, and that's okay. And Kelly, I totally like what you were talking about with your kid. I mean, yeah, believe me, I don't know. Thank God my daughter has a job, because she has to put on real clothes like part of the time, because otherwise she would just be in her pajamas no matter what. Virginia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I just think that we reflect, or we're a reflection onto our kids. And if we're constantly feeling down, depressed, defeated, the kids definitely feel that. I try to, again, see the positive in every situation. And when my son complains, like, gosh, we can't go to school. And I'm like, well, think about this. Now, when you do go back to school, you'll really appreciate it that much more. Or if college, if what you decide to do is take online classes, now you know what it's like. This is what we're doing, and I just always try to, whatever they want to try to complain about, I'll kind of turn it around. So I've noticed that a lot of the time, their mentality is now like that. They really don't complain too much about things. More they'll come to me and be like, Mom, this is, happening. What should I do? And I'll guide them through it. But I've noticed that thankfully they've been able to kind of take on the same mentality that I've been trying to instill in them, even though it is it is difficult. Definitely not easy. Distance learning has been extremely difficult, but I'm just trying to show them that these are life, lessons, and this is just kind of how things are. Life is not always the way we want it to be or how we think it's going to turn out. Things happen. There are so many unexpecteds that we kind of just got to be ready for it and adapt to it. And when they go off to the real world, adaptation is just what they just need to do. I mean, things are constantly changing, and this is a good way for them to kind of learn how to deal with such situation. I mean, later on, if they don't ever go through a pandemic again, they'll be like, gosh, we remember going through that pandemic and we got through that. I can get through, something else.
John, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I actually really liked how was it Virginia? Is that her name, Virginia?
Yeah.
Yes, I really like how Virginia was saying how she's using this learning to use it as a learning component. Using this opportunity to teach kids that that we can find answers even through a tough time, and to reach out for answers and utilize like our own knowledge on how to seek for answers. So I really like Virginia's take on the whole distance learning and teaching our kids how to find answers.
Thank you. I have also felt it's very helpful. It's been extremely helpful to teach my son to advocate for himself, especially when we're away at work and he's here. Small things, emails, something they're not used to doing, but us as adults, we may do all the time. That's something he's learning. I'm like, this is how you start an email. This is how you write it. This is how you end it. So he's getting used to these, just the smallest things I try to bring out, like, look at, these are things that you wouldn't probably have learned if this wouldn't have happened.
What I think is a really unique opportunity that we have is one of my biggest worries in working with high schoolers is that a lot of them haven't really experienced pain or disappointment. I mean, some of them have gone through and not had that experience. And the fact that we have the opportunity to parent them through that, my worry is always that kids are going to go off to college, they're going to move out, and then they're going to experience their first true pain and suffering without the support of their families. And so this is like a very unique opportunity where it's like, okay, we're all kind of embracing this disappointment that we're living in, and we're teaching them and we're modeling, like Virginia, you're modeling the skills to be able to get through difficult things. And I think that is something that, I'm grateful for in some ways. One of the things I like to kind of think about is like, okay, I like to divide the stresses into things we have control over, because it's like, okay, if there's something I can take action on, I will. But if there's not, and I need to accept it, like Virginia said, like, what is the silver lining? There's always a silver lining, and it might take months to figure out what that is. I might have shared this story last week, but I had to go to an appointment and I had to take my kids over to my mother-in-law's, and it was 7:30 in the morning, and I had to pile them all in the car and make sure they had breakfast. And it reminded me of last year. And I didn't realize how much I hated commuting to school with 3 kids. It was horrible. And so now I'm like, whoa, this is a beautiful part of being home, is I do not have to drag them out of bed and force them into the car. Right. And that was the silver lining for me. I love that I get to spend time just watching movies with the kids in the afternoons now. I love that. And that's something that I would never have had the opportunity to do. That doesn't mean that I'm okay with this and that I'm happy and I want to be quarantined forever, but it just means that I'm okay right now with what's happening. And the fourth question was, with distance learning, okay, the third was, what was your response to the situation? Like, how did you respond to it? And the fourth one is, how did your response affect your own thoughts and feelings? So like, you know, like Ginny said, like making workstations for the kids. I felt like I was contributing in some way. On the days when I was kind of against it, I noticed that it gave me more feelings of anxiety when I tried to fight it, or when I was disappointed in it, or in the beginning when my middle schoolers at Berryessa, I thought they were doing a terrible job communicating and handling things. You know, that was something that was creating a lot of stress and anxiety for me. I have no control over what they're doing. You know, I wasn't having the empathy and the like just ability to like, I needed someone to blame. Like, this sucks at Berryessa, sucks at this and that, and you know, whatever. But it's like, no, this is an opportunity for us to practice that empathy and that understanding, because we're all experiencing things that we've never done before. And so for me, those are the silver linings. So I don't know if you guys have, you know, like Virginia, your silver lining is your kids are going to be equipped to handle real world experiences. You're having the opportunity to model these healthy behaviors. So what other silver linings have you found?
I think for me, my response and how it made me feel, like I feel in control if I have a plan. So I can't control the reality. I can't control the pandemic. I can't control that we're in distance learning, but I can control my plan for it. And I'm just the type of person, because I'm very like methodical and organized, that like if I've got a plan, then I'm okay. So that is just something that helps me cope. And not everybody is a planner. So, but that's that for me. It like gives me, and it may be a false feeling of control, but it's just that kind of security of like, all right, this is what I've got control over.
I think for me, it was tough, it was stressful and unexpected, but it really pushed me to do things that I probably wouldn't have done or that I've been meaning to do, but it just came quicker and it just had to be done now. So, like, for example, making the room for my kids, I've had my brother living with me for the past 8 years. And I was like, okay, I need the room for one of my sons now. Like, it's time, and he was very understanding. And then it got into like, okay, now he's out of the house. I got to make this a space for my son to make it, his space. So then the remodeling process started. And these are things that were to do on the to-do list, but never really got done. And then we were kind of just forced to do it. And it felt good, then like finally we got it done. It kind of pushed us to do things that we didn't expect to do now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So one way to kind of start adapting this attitude of acceptance is to start with really small things. So we're trying to think of things that can be like frustrating. Like for me, I literally hate waiting in line at a grocery store. I hate self-checkout. The grocery store drives me bananas. So that was one that I came up with. We're not really dealing with traffic, but some unexpected things that could happen. Your Wi-Fi is down. The weather is going to ruin your plans. Like just these little disappointments. Taking those situations and kind of adapting these kind of mantras, like this is how it is right now. Everything, I can't change what's happening. There's no point in fighting it. I don't have any control right now. I'm going to be okay, and so just using little tiny situations of disappointment so that when the really tough stuff happens, you're already kind of building that core thought of everything is okay right now. This is what it is. So if you can find some situations just in your day to day of things that are, like I'm about to walk out of this room and go find out that there's probably a huge pile of dishes in my kitchen. I can yell and scream and create more anxiety for myself. And so how I'm going to handle that situation, I don't know that I'm radically accepting that just yet, but.
Yeah, I think and we're kind of nearing our end. Yvonne, did you want to show that video or it's okay? We
It's
can
okay. No, I think it's
save
okay.
it for
I mean,
next
it's kind
week
of
too.
an over, like a, just
Okay. So we, Yvonne and I, when we mapped this out, we actually planned this week and next week to go together. And so this week we were talking about acceptance. Next week we're talking about resetting. And so just kind of like that idea of like when you've accepted something and now like, okay, this is our reality, then how do you reset yourself? Because you still want to be moving forward and having goals and like you don't want to just like stay in that like, all right, I have no control of the situation. Like, but like how do you like then like move on and be okay, because that's what you want to do. So I guess I've got a little homework for everybody is to think about a situation, and think like Yvonne was saying, like start small this week on something that you don't have control over, something that you have to accept, like if it's the dishes in the sink or the line at the grocery store or whatever it is, that just drives you crazy, and then just practice this idea of accepting. And so we have a hand up.
Just like to share one thing that many, many years ago, one of my mentors told me that acceptance is an ability. So I still keep that words in my mind for so many years, and I still practicing this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's something that we have to practice. It's something that we have to work on. And again, I want to reiterate to you guys that acceptance doesn't mean approval. You don't have to like the line at the grocery store, but that doesn't mean you have to throw a fit about it. So it's like, how do you react to it?
and like what Jill said too, like it kind of goes, everything kind of goes up and down. And there might be a moment where I'm totally able to accept the line at the grocery store. And then that doesn't mean that I'm going to accept it forever. It's something like you said, like to practice and to keep doing until it becomes a little more natural for us. And, that doesn't mean like, okay, this is the answer. You're never going to feel frustrated again because you're just going to accept the world as it is. It doesn't work that way. It's something that you'll always strive to do, always to get better at.
You have another comment?
Yes. So in other words, acceptance doesn't mean that passive. In some way, it is active way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's an ability. So it's not that passive, Yeah, thank you.
And I like that because that was kind of the thought, like I said before, like, I don't like this idea. It feels very passive. Like, I feel like I'm just letting everything go, but really it's not. You're right. It is an action.
And I like what Hillary said, with sharing what's going on with your kids. And so I guess that'd be the second part of your homework this week. Not only just pick something, but share it with your kids, and say like what you're having to accept, and see what they think. Because I think that's, a great conversation starter. To introduce them to this idea too. I actually am I have to, when we're done here today, I have to write my article for the school newspaper, and I'm going to write about this topic. So I'm going to be sharing it with the kids. So you want one last comment? Your hand up. No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. It is 10 o'clock. And so I really appreciate you spending this time with us. And like I said, we're going to continue this conversation next week, and kind of then we touched on it today, like what do you then do? But like next week is really kind of like, okay, the next step, like how do you then improve your situation? Okay.
And remember, Judy and I are just starting this the same way that you are. This is not, we're not an expert in this because I do not have it all figured out by any means. So thank you.